DotVVM minutes. Today I will be playing with Postback Handlers, which is a feature of DotVVM that allows you to add special behavior to buttons and other controls which trigger postbacks. I will add a loading animation to a button while a postback on the button is running. If you have seen the previous episodes of DotVVM minutes, you will be familiar with this page, because I've been using it through the entire series. And here's the order form, so you can enter your information. I have already done that as a default values in the view model, so we don't need to fill anything. And what I want to do is to add some animation to a button when this order is being submitted. So the user will not be able to submit the order while it's already being submitted, so it's something like double postback prevention. And also the user will see the indication of the operation that is running. So when I click here, you can see that there is the animation and the button is also disabled, so I cannot click multiple times. As you can see, I'm in a debug mode, so I have this pop-up that postback was interrupted. Yeah, so only the first postback will be triggered and will reach the server. Okay, so let's jump in the code. This is the button which does the entire magic. So there is the continue to checkout text, and it's a button because it will contain text and also an image. So we need to use the button element instead of the input. The size of the button is large, which will add some bootstrap CSS classes. And block button, it means that it behaves like a block element, so it has the 100% of the available width. I'm just calling a function called checkout in the view model, and I'm doing nothing here because it's just a demo, but you can see that I have added this sleep here, so we will see that the animation will be running while this code is executed. Okay? And the magic is done by a postback handler, which is something like an extension to the postback mechanism. The postback handler can intercept this call, and you can do anything you want before the call is sent to the server or after you receive a response from the server. And the response can be successful or failing. Yeah, because the request can end with an exception, or the network connection may be broken, so you won't even get the response now. So there are two states, basically the success and failure. And the postback handler can take any of these three stages and do any kind of operation at once. And because this is a little bit advanced feature of DotVVM, then you will need to write some JavaScript, but it's not so difficult. Basically, if you have been working with promises in JavaScript, it's pretty easy to do. Okay, so the first thing, so DotVVM needs to know about this element, loading animation postback handler. Yeah, and this is added in the postback handler collections. So I have I have created a class which inherits from postback handler. And I have also in the DotVVM startup, I have registered a code control because it behaves like a code control. So I have registered this code control under this CC prefix. So you can see it's CC loading animation postback handler. And basically this C# class is just a descriptor of the API of the postback handler. Yeah, because the postback handler can have some parameters, which are here, this property and this property. If you're wondering why this code is so long, it's a similar mechanism as WPF dependency properties, which also it's a getter and setter, but it also needs to store a data binding. So you can use this code snippet .prop. And if you have ReSharper, you need to press escape to dismiss the IntelliSense, and then you can press tab and you will have this template, and you can just change the type and the name and the owning class of this property. Yeah, so it's not so difficult to do, and there is also a method you need to override, and it just takes the values of these properties and passes them to the JavaScript part of the Postback Handler, because it has two parts. It has the C# part, which is here basically to provide information, strongly typed information for the IntelliSense. So we have the control, and it has two properties, which you can set through from the markup, yeah, so it knows about them. And then there is a JavaScript part I have here, and it's a little bit longer but not so difficult. It could be actually much shorter, but I wanted this code to be commented and easy to read, so that's why it's taking so many lines. And basically I'm registering a Postback handler called loading animation, and it's a function which will get the options, and this is the dictionary of parameters which are provided by this getHandler options method. And also this name of the Postback handler must be exactly the same as this one, yeah, because then by this identifier the .vvm will know which C# class and which JavaScript Postback handler are belonging together. Yeah. So this function will get the options of the handler. I just extract them to my variables, and I've prepared two functions. The first is called start animation, and this function will be called when I need to add the animation icon to the button, and also to set a CSS class which will make the button disabled. I have set some default values, so you can see that for the loading icon CSS class, I have this long list of CSS classes because I'm using the Font Awesome CSS icons. So you can just render an I element with these classes and it will look like the loading animation. And I'm also adding the disabled class to the button while the postback is running, so the button will be grayed out, the color will be changed, and the user will see that he cannot click the button right now. Yeah. So this is the default values. That's why I didn't have to set these properties in the markup, but I can override those values if I want. And so if this CSS class is set, it can also be empty. So in that case, we won't add the animation icon. So it will create an element, just the I element. It will set the class name to the list of classes, and it will append this icon to my sender. Sender is the button element in JavaScript. Yeah, so I will pass the button element here, and it will just add the icon at the end as the last child of this element, so it will appear behind my text. If the button CSS class is set, I will just add a CSS class to the button. I have to be careful because the button can already have some CSS classes, so I cannot just set class name because I would lose the CSS classes which would be there, but I can say classlist.add, which will add the CSS class to and keep and preserve the original ones. Yeah. And I'm also returning the icon because I will need it in the stop animation function to remove it. Yeah, so if I get the icon, I will just remove it and it will disappear. And if the button CSS class is set, so I will remove it from the list of CSS classes on the button, so only the original ones will stay there. And the last thing is the Postback handler implementation itself. This is just some helpers for so the Postback handler will be easy to write. Yeah. So this is the start animation and stop animation, and the Postback handler needs to return an object with an execute method, and this method is the Postback handler itself. I'm getting the callback, which is something like basically it's a promise which will call the method on the server and process the results. Yeah. And because it's a JavaScript promise, I can do something and then launch the promise, or I can just say when this promise is finished, I can do anything I want. So at first, I will start an animation and keep the icon in my variable, and then I will call this function. So this will trigger the promise. So the request will be created and sent to the server. The server will execute the method which I have been calling, and then after I get the result, I can either this or this function will be called. The first one will be called if the result is successful. So when the command just executes and returns a successful response, this will be called. And when there is any kind of failure, like a network connectivity issue or exception on the server, I will be able to read this result, and also I'm stopping the animation. So in both cases, I will just stop the animation. If there was an error, I could, for example, set another CSS class to the button, so make it red, to indicate that the operation failed, but I'm not doing this right now. But it would be also a nice option. Yeah. So basically, you will get the promise, and you can bind event handlers when this promise is finished. So when this request will be processed, when the postback will be completed, you can also bind this and this. And you can use multiple postback handlers on the button. So I could also use .confirm. So you can ask the user, do you really want to submit the order? And they are going in the chain. So at first, when you click the button, the first postback handler will be triggered. So it will display the confirmation. And when you decide that you will cancel this postback, if you don't want to submit the order, you can, and then this won't be executed at all. And if the user passes through the first postback handler, then this one will come to the place. So you can chain the postback handlers in any order you like. Also, there is another important thing. You need to set postback concurrency to deny. It's a new feature from DotVVM 2.0, and this will disable the button while a postback is running on the button. So if you click it twice, only the first postback will be taken in account, and the other will be just ignored. The last thing you can do is because if you want to use this feature on all buttons in the application, you would need to set postback concurrency and postback handlers on every button, which can be pretty annoying. So what you can do is this. You can just not set the postback concurrency and the postback handlers, and you can use a server-side style, which is also a feature which is new in DotVVM 2.0, and you can set automatically these two properties to all buttons based on some condition. For me, the condition is if it's submit button, I will use the loading animation and the postback concurrency. If it's not the submit button, then it may not be important there, so I have chosen not to apply this style on these buttons. So if I find any button which is submit button, I will apply this and this. And it's quite easy to do. It's done in .vvm startup. And here is the style. So I'm registering a new style, which will apply for all buttons in the application. I can set some conditions. So it will apply only on buttons where button is submit button equals to true. And I'm doing two things. I say that when this style matches some control, I will set a control property. And set control property means create a control and append it to a property collection. Yeah, so basically, I'm creating a control called loading animation postback handler, and I will add it in the postback handlers property. And because it's a collection, I need to set that I need to append this. If this was just a property of type control, I can just ignore this parameter, but because this is a collection, I need to say that I need to append. And also I will set a .vvm property, postback concurrency, to deny. So basically I'm doing the same thing as in the markup, but this will apply to all submit buttons across the entire application. So it's quite convenient way to apply some global rules in your website. If I rebuild this and try it again, you will see that the behavior is exactly the same. I can click the button and you can see that there is the animation and the button was disabled, so I get the postback interrupted message when I try to invoke another postback while the first one is still running. Okay, and that's it. So feel free to ask any questions in the comments or send us feedback, and see you next time in .vvm Minutes.